My name is Nora Calloway. I am 41 years old. I'm going to tell you about a Sunday afternoon in October in a living room in Knoxville, Tennessee, where 7 people sat in a circle and took turns explaining why I was wrong for the man I had married. The man I had married was in that room. He sat in the chair closest to the window, the one with the blue cushion his mother had needle-pointed herself, a pattern of magnolia flowers, slightly uneven on the left side where her arthritis had gotten worse. I remember staring at that cushion while his aunt read from a list. A list. She had written it down. I sat through 47 minutes of it. I counted. I know because I watched the brass clock on the mantel, the one his grandmother had brought from Louisville in 1974, and I tracked every minute the way you track the distance to the exit on a plane that's begun to shake. When they finished, Patricia, his mother, folded her hands in her lap and looked at me with something she probably believed was love. She said, "We just want what's best for our son." I said, "I know." And then I said nothing else. That was the last Sunday in October, 4 years ago. I want to take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where everything that happened in that room was already written. I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina. The western part, not the artsy downtown people visit now, but the older neighborhoods up the hill where the houses are narrow and the yards slope and the neighbors still wave from their porches because they've known each other for 30 years. My mother worked dispatch for the county. My father installed floors, hardwood, tile, laminate, whatever people needed. He worked 6 days a week for 22 years and came home smelling like sawdust and adhesive and something chemical I could never name, but that meant he was home. We were not wealthy. We were careful. I learned to stretch $1 before I learned to drive. I learned to read a contract before I signed anything because my father got burned once. A verbal agreement on a renovation job, $11,400 of work. The client denied it. No paperwork, nothing. He lost it. All of it. He sat at the kitchen table that night and said one sentence. "Nora, paper, always." I was 14. I never forgot. I went to UNC Asheville on partial scholarship and a $4,200 loan I took out myself. I studied design, not because someone told me I was talented, though I was, but because I understood space. I understood how a room makes a person feel before they can understand it themselves. How the angle of light from a west-facing window at 4 in the afternoon can make someone feel either held or exposed. How the difference between a 9-foot ceiling and an 8-foot ceiling isn't 1 foot. It's the sensation of being allowed to breathe. I graduated. I worked for a firm in Asheville for 3 years. Then I moved to Knoxville for a position with a larger firm, Hartwell and Cross Design Group, where I made $48,000 a year worked 60 hours a week, and learned slowly that the work I was doing was building someone else's name. I was 29 when I met Marcus Whitfield. He was at a client dinner, not my client, a colleague's. He was introduced as a civil engineer who'd worked on the Pellissippi Parkway extension. He was tall. He was quiet in the way that reads as steady when you're 29 and doesn't reveal itself as something else until much later. We dated for 14 months. I met his family at month 3. And I want to be precise about what I noticed at that first dinner. Because I noticed everything. I just didn't know yet what I was noticing. The Whitfield family home was on Leon View Pike, a large colonial on a double lot, the kind of house that announces itself. Patricia had decorated it herself, every room, and she was proud of this in the way some people are proud of things that are also about control. She showed me the dining room wallpaper first. Pressed linen, hand-applied, a pattern of cream and deep green. She'd sourced it from a vendor in Charleston. I told her it was beautiful. It was. She told me what it cost. $340 a roll. 14 rolls. I did the math before she finished the sentence. That was the first thing I noticed. Patricia priced everything she showed you. Not to impress, to measure. She was calculating what you knew and what you didn't, and calibrating her opinion of you accordingly. Marcus had a sister named Renee. She was 2 years younger, lived 12 minutes away, called her mother twice a day. Renee was warm to my face in the specific way that makes the back of your neck feel cold. She asked questions like they were compliments, phrased sweetly, aimed precisely. You're so independent, Nora. Did you always live alone? Marcus says you work a lot. Does that ever bother you? I just think it's so interesting that you don't want kids yet. Most women your age. She never finished that sentence. She'd stop just before the edge and smile and touch my arm. Marcus's father, Gerald, barely spoke. He sat at the head of the table, ate his food, and occasionally looked at his wife with an expression I now recognize as a man who had long since stopped trying to redirect a river. I liked Gerald. That first dinner, I ate pot roast and talked about my work, and watched the room and told myself, this is just family. Every family has texture. This is just texture. I was right about the texture. I was wrong about what it meant. Marcus proposed 11 months later. A Tuesday evening in February, at the kitchen table in our apartment, which I thought was oddly plain until I realized he'd chosen it because that was where we ate breakfast together on Sundays, which he said was his favorite thing about us. I said yes. The ring had been his grandmother's. A simple oval sapphire, white gold band, slightly worn on the underside where decades of living had touched it. I loved it. I still have it, not on my finger, but I have it. The wedding was in April. 83 people at a venue outside the city. My side of the aisle, my mother, my father, my 2 cousins, 3 friends from college. His side filled the rows. I remember standing at the back of that venue before I walked in, looking at the ratio of people, and feeling something I didn't name at the time. I can name it now. I felt outnumbered. The campaign, and I want to be clear that it was a campaign, not a moment, not a misunderstanding, started before the wedding, and I didn't recognize it as such until it had been running for 2 years. It looked like this. Patricia called Marcus every morning at 7:15. Every morning. I know the time because I made coffee at 7, and by the time it was ready, the phone was ringing. Marcus always answered. The calls lasted between 12 and 25 minutes. He would walk to the other room. Sometimes I heard him laugh. Sometimes I heard the specific quieter register of his voice that meant she was asking about us. I asked him once, early on, what they talked about. He said just stuff, family stuff, and looked at me in the way that means the door to this conversation is not open. I did not push. Renee started a family group text that included everyone except me. I found out at month 4 of marriage when Marcus mentioned something Renee had said in the thread. I asked which thread. His face shifted. He said he'd add me. He didn't. At Thanksgiving of our first year, Patricia served the meal in courses. She made place cards. Mine put me at the far end of the table, beside Gerald and a great uncle named Roy, who was 91 and had difficulty hearing. Marcus sat 3 seats away, between his mother and his sister. Renee had made the seating chart. She announced cheerfully, because their mother deserved a break from organizing everything. Patricia smiled at Renee, then looked at me across the table. I ate my food. I talked to Gerald. I talked to Roy, who told me about his late wife, Constance, for 40 minutes, and who called her the best decision I ever made, with such plain certainty that I excused myself to use the restroom and stood in the hallway for 2 full minutes with my hand flat against the wall. By the 2nd year, the shape of it was clear to me, even if I hadn't named it yet. Sunday dinners at Patricia's every 2 weeks. Marcus went. I was invited, but the invitation always arrived through him, never directly to me. When I came, conversation included me politely and excluded me precisely. Questions about work, questions about Asheville. Nothing that acknowledged I was now part of the family. Nothing that used the word family to include me. When I couldn't come, a work deadline, a prior obligation, the tone on Marcus when he got home was different. Warmer toward him somehow. He wouldn't have said that, but I could read it on him the way you read whether on someone who's been outside. I talked to Marcus about it in the spring of our 2nd year. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, the same table where he'd proposed, And I said, I feel like I'm on the outside of your family, and you don't seem to notice. He said, you're being too sensitive. He said it gently. That matters. He said it the way you say something to someone you love, but whose reality you have decided you cannot afford to confirm. I was not being too sensitive. I know this because of what I found later, but I'm not there yet. In month 22 of our marriage, I started my own firm, Calloway Design. $18,000 of my own savings, money I'd kept in a separate account since before we married, not out of suspicion, but out of habit. My father's lesson: paper, always. I told Marcus before I gave notice at Hartwell and Cross. He said, "Are you sure? That's a big risk." I said I was sure. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My mom thinks you're always trying to prove something." He said it like he was relaying information, neutrally, like he was just passing along weather data from another station. I looked at him for a long moment. I said, "What do you think?" He didn't answer. I gave my notice the following Monday. Before I go further, if you've ever had someone take another person's version of you and hand it back to you as fact, drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if this story is resonating, please subscribe. I read every single comment. Now let me keep going. I want to tell you what I tried. Because for 14 months after that kitchen conversation, I tried. I went to every Sunday dinner. I brought things: wine, a dish, flowers once. The flowers were placed on the kitchen counter and never made it to the table. I suggested couples therapy to Marcus. He agreed once, then found reasons to reschedule 3 sessions in a row until the appointment window lapsed, and the therapist sent a follow-up email I don't think he ever replied to. I wrote Patricia a letter, 3 pages handwritten on good paper. I told her I wanted to be closer, that I respected her home and her family, that I wasn't trying to take Marcus away from anything, only to be included in it. I asked if we could have coffee, just the 2 of us, no agenda. She called Marcus. She did not call me. He told me she found the letter strange, that it felt like something was wrong, that maybe I needed to talk to someone. I had tried to talk to someone. I had tried to talk to her. I want you to remember that letter, because it comes back later in a way Patricia did not anticipate. The intervention happened in October of our 3rd year. Patricia called it a family conversation. Marcus told me it was Sunday dinner. We drove there together. His hands were on the wheel in the particular way they got when he was managing something, thumbs tight, not resting. I noticed. I said nothing. We pulled into the driveway, and there were 3 extra cars. Renee's silver Buick, a red pickup that belonged to Marcus's Uncle Jeff, who lived in Maryville and who I had met exactly twice. and a car I didn't recognize, small, dark blue, a rental lot kind of clean. I sat in the passenger seat for a moment. Marcus said, "It'll be fine." He said it to the windshield. Inside, the living room had been arranged. Not dramatically. They weren't dramatic people. But the chairs had been moved from their usual positions into a specific circle, and one chair, a straight-backed dining chair, was positioned differently from the rest. For me, Patricia was there, Renee, Jeff and his wife Carol, Marcus's Aunt Donna, who I had always thought was the kindest one, and who now sat with her hands folded and would not meet my eyes. And a woman I had never met, small, gray-haired, wearing a blazer over a cream blouse, whom Patricia introduced as a family counselor. They had hired someone. I sat down in the chair. I placed my bag on the floor. I looked at the brass clock on the mantel. It was 4:47 in the afternoon. They took turns. Patricia went first. She said she loved her son and wanted his happiness. She said that in the past 3 years, she had watched him become stressed, withdrawn, less connected to his family. She said she believed the marriage was not bringing out his best self. She used the word compatibility 4 times. She did not say my name once. Renee went next. She said she missed her brother, that he used to call her every week and now called less often. She said, and I remember this precisely, Nora has a very strong personality, and sometimes that can be overwhelming for someone like Marcus. Someone like Marcus. Uncle Jeff said he just wanted to put it on the table that Marcus deserved someone who prioritized family. Donna said she was sorry, just barely above a whisper, and then said nothing more. The family counselor spoke about alignment of values and attachment styles, and looked at me with professional neutrality, the way a referee looks at a player who is about to be asked to leave the field. 47 minutes. I watched the clock. I kept my hands in my lap. I breathed the way I'd learned to breathe when I was driving in bad weather, slow, deliberate, from the bottom of the chest. I looked at Marcus once, somewhere in the middle. He was looking at the floor. When they finished, Patricia folded her hands and said, "We just want what's best for our son." I said, "I know. Nothing else." After a moment, I picked up my bag. I said, "Excuse me," to no one in particular. I walked to the bathroom down the hall. I ran cold water. I looked at myself in the mirror above the sink. A mirror I had once suggested Patricia hang there because the original was too dark for the space. She had taken the suggestion. She had never acknowledged it was my suggestion. I dried my hands on the hand towel, embroidered with the word family in cursive. I walked back to the living room. Marcus was standing. The circle had loosened. People were looking at me with the expression of people who believe they have done something kind and are waiting to find out if you understand that. I picked up my coat from the arm of the sofa I said, "Marcus, I'll see you at home." And I left. Not quickly, not slowly. I drove home in complete silence. No music, the windows up, the highway noise, and nothing else. I made tea. I sat at the kitchen table. I thought for a long time. Not about whether to leave. I had decided that in the car. I thought about how there was a woman named Sylvia Reeves. She was 63 years old and ran an architecture firm in Asheville that her late husband had started in 1987. When he died in 2014, she kept it running, not because she had to, but because he'd built something real, and she wasn't going to let it become nothing just because he was gone. I met Sylvia when I was 26 at a professional development event I almost didn't attend because I'd worked 11 hours that day and all I wanted was to go home. I stayed because the speaker canceled and they opened the bar early, and Sylvia sat down next to me and said, "You look like you're doing the math on whether this was worth the drive." I laughed. I said, "The answer is not yet." She said, "Give it 10 minutes. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about running the firm after her husband's death, about the year she almost sold it, about the specific Tuesday morning she decided not to. She said, "I realized no one was going to hand me a reason to keep going. I had to build the reason myself." She wasn't talking about the firm. Over the years, Sylvia became the person I called when I needed someone outside my situation to help me see it clearly. She was not a therapist. She was not my mother. She was something more specific. A woman who had already been through a version of what I was going through and had come out the other side still standing, still building, still genuinely interested in what came next. When I called her the night of the intervention, it was 10:15. Marcus still wasn't home. She answered on the second ring. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nora, when someone shows you the architecture of a room, believe them. That room was built a long time ago. You were just the last one to see the blueprint." I wrote that down on the notepad I keep by the kitchen table. I still have that page. She said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need to know what I'm doing next." She said, "You already know. You called me because you needed someone to confirm you're not crazy. You're not crazy. Now write it down." I opened my laptop. I started writing. Marcus came home at 11:40. He looked tired in the specific way of someone who has done something they told themselves was necessary. He sat across from me and said, "I'm sorry about tonight." I said, "Which part?" He didn't answer that. He said, They're worried. They love me." I said, "I know they do." I closed the laptop. I said, "Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not angry. I'm not going to yell or cry or make this into a scene. But what happened tonight was a choice. You made a choice about what you were willing to let happen in that room. I need you to sit with that." He said, "I didn't know it was going to be like." I said, "I know." I stood up. I said, "I'm going to bed." I slept on my side. He slept on his. The room was very still. In the morning, he made coffee. We sat at the kitchen table and didn't say much. When he left for work, I waited 10 minutes. Then I opened my phone to the notes section, where 3 months earlier I had written down the name and number of a family law attorney. Corinne Bassett, downtown Knoxville. I called her. If you've ever had to stay completely still in a room that was designed to make you disappear, type cold in the comments. I want to know you're here. And before we get to the rest, only about 4% of people watching actually subscribe. If this story is reaching you, take 3 seconds and tap that button. Okay, let's finish this. The divorce took 8 months. I want to tell you it was clean. It wasn't. Nothing about the end of a marriage is clean, but it was precise. Corinne Bassett was $275 an hour and worth every dollar of the $6,800 I spent. We divided what we had. The apartment was mine. My name had been on the lease before we married, and I had been paying $1,400 a month toward the $2,100 rent for 3 years. We agreed on that without much discussion. We had no children. We had no property. What we had were years, and years don't divide. You just carry yours forward and leave the other person to carry theirs. Marcus moved out in February. He took the furniture we'd bought together and a set of dishes and the cast iron pan. I kept the drafting table that had been my father's, the sapphire ring, and the notepad with Sylvia's sentence on it. He moved 12 minutes from his mother's house. I know this because Renee posted a photo of the housewarming dinner on her public Instagram the following week. Someone I knew sent it to me with the message, "I'm sorry. I thought you should see it." I looked at the photo for about 4 seconds. Then I put my phone down and went back to work. Calloway Design had 6 clients at that point. I was running it from the apartment, a home office, a project management subscription, the drafting table by the east window. By spring, I had 9 clients. By summer, 12. I moved the firm into a proper space in July, a suite on Market Square, $1,850 a month, north-facing windows that gave clean, even light all day. I hired an assistant named Deja, 24 years old, graduated top of her class, and more organized than I will ever be. I told her that directly. She received it with the calm of someone who already knew. I was rebuilding, not as a statement, not to prove anything to anyone watching. I was rebuilding the way you rebuild anything real, quietly, specifically, one piece at a time, without waiting for an audience. 14 months after the divorce was finalized, Patricia Whitfield called me. She called on a Thursday afternoon. October, exactly 2 years after the intervention. The number was different from the one I had for her. I answered without knowing. She said, "Nora, it's Patricia." I said, "Hello, Patricia." She said she had gotten my number from Marcus, that she hoped I didn't mind. I waited. She said she had a situation. She used the word situation the way people use it when they mean something considerably larger. She and Gerald were updating their estate. There were documents that needed to be completed, and she'd been advised to have the property on Leon View Pike formally assessed. Before the assessment, she was considering some renovation work. She wanted a design consultation, existing finishes, what could be updated to improve the appraisal value. She said, "I thought of you." I sat with that sentence. She thought of me. She thought of the woman she had assembled 7 people to remove from her son's life. She thought of her when she needed something. I said, "What kind of scope are we discussing?" She described it. Kitchen cabinets, master bath, some flooring in the main hallway. She said, "You were always good at that. I always respected your eye." I wrote that down, her words, the date, the time, 2:38 in the afternoon. Then I said, "I'd be glad to come take a look, because I have a business to run, because I am a professional, and because, if I'm being honest, I wanted to sit in that living room one more time with clear eyes and nothing left to lose." I drove to Knoxville on a Wednesday morning in November. The house was the same, the colonial, the double lot, the magnolia in the front yard going slightly leggy, needing shaping. Patricia opened the door. She looked older, not dramatically, just the way 2 years look on a person who has been carrying something they thought they put down. She offered coffee. I accepted. We walked through every room. I took notes. I photographed the finishes, the floor grade, the cabinet construction. I made professional assessments about the kitchen, the master bath tile, the hardwood floors in the hallway that had been refinished one too many times, and were starting to show the grain in the wrong direction. 2 hours and 40 minutes. I said very little that was personal. At the end, we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she had served the Thanksgiving pot roast 3 years earlier. And she poured a second cup of coffee and looked at me the way people look when they are building towards something. She said, "I'm sorry about how things ended." I looked at her. She said, "With Marcus, I'm sorry it didn't work out." That phrasing. She was sorry it didn't work out. Not, "I'm sorry for what we did in that room." Not, "I'm sorry I hired someone to sit across from you while my son looked at the floor." Not, "I'm sorry for 2 years of placement cards and unanswered letters, and a group text you were never added to." She was sorry it didn't work out. I looked at her for a moment. I said, "Thank you for the coffee, Patricia. I'll have the report to you by Friday. She said, You know, Nora, I always did think you were capable. I just thought. I said, I'll have the report to you by Friday. Not unkindly. Just finally. I sent the report on Friday morning. 12 pages. Thorough, professional. Exactly what she hired me to do. 3 renovation tiers with cost estimates and projected return on appraisal value. A timeline. Notes on contractor sequencing. The cover letter was on Calloway design letterhead. A mark I had designed myself. A clean serif font. The Market Square address beneath it. My invoice was attached. $1,400. Standard rate for a full residential consultation and written report. She paid within 48 hours. I want to tell you, there was a larger moment. A scene in the living room where I finally said everything I had carried for 3 years. And she finally understood. And the brass clock ticked on the mantel, while the truth settled over everything like weather. There wasn't. That's not how this ends. This ends quietly, the way most real things end. I drove back to Asheville that Friday afternoon. I took the highway west, the one that climbs through the mountains, where the trees in November are bare and the ridgeline is sharp against the sky. I had the windows down. It was cold enough to feel it. I thought about the chair in the living room, the straight-backed dining chair that had been placed differently from the rest. When I'd walked through the house that Wednesday, it was back in the dining room. Of course it was. They hadn't left a monument. It was just a chair, returned to its place. But I had stood in the spot where it had been, and I had felt something settle in me, not triumph, not grief, not even satisfaction exactly. Just clarity. The kind of clarity that only arrives when you finally stop waiting for someone to tell you that what happened to you was real. It was real. The letter I wrote, the seats at the table, the group text, the 7:15 calls, the chair. It was all real. And I had sat in that chair and said 2 words and walked out and built a life. That's what happened. That's all that happened. Sylvia passed away 8 months ago. A stroke, quick, the way you hope for with the people you love, though there is no good version of losing them. She left me her drafting table, the original one from the firm, a Mayline 1980s model, heavy, the surface scarred from 40 years of projects. It was in her office when I came to help her daughter pack. Her daughter, Ellen, kept saying, She talked about you all the time. All the time. I said, She talked about you all the time too. We packed for 3 hours. At the end, I found, tucked inside a building code manual on her shelf, a small note card. Her handwriting slightly large, slightly tilted right, the way it always was. It said, Nora, the best rooms are the ones you design for yourself. S. It's pinned above my drafting table. I am 41 years old. I live in Asheville, in a city I chose. I run a firm with 4 people and 31 clients across western North Carolina and East Tennessee. Last year, a regional architecture journal ran a 2-page feature on a farmhouse renovation I completed in Weaverville. A project the client had been dreaming about for 11 years before she finally had someone she trusted enough to build it. I keep the article in the top drawer of my desk, not to show anyone, just to know it's there. Marcus remarried last spring. I heard through someone who knew someone. I don't know her name. I hope she's well. I hope, genuinely, that she knows the room she's walking into, that she can read the architecture before she's the last one to see the blueprint. I haven't spoken to him since the day the paperwork was filed. I haven't spoken to Patricia since I sent the report. The door is not locked, but I hold the key, and I decide every single morning at the kitchen table with the coffee and the light coming through the east window, whether today is the day I open it. So far, today has not been that day. Lessons from this story. 1. Silence is not defeat. Sometimes it is the most precise thing you can say, and the only thing the room cannot argue with. 2. A person who speaks on someone else's behalf while that person sits 12 feet away has already told you everything about where you rank. 3. The people who need you to fail have told you exactly what they are afraid of. Pay attention to that. Build toward it. 4. Building quietly while others assume you've been diminished is not strategy. It's just what capable people do when they stop waiting for permission. 5. The best rooms are the ones you design for yourself. If this story meant something to you, I want to hear about it. Drop a comment. Tell me who the Sylvia is in your life. The one who picked up on the second ring. The one who told you the truth when everyone else was managing you. The one who left you something to work at when they were gone. I'll read everyone. There's another story in the description. It begins at an estate auction in a small county in eastern Tennessee. It ends with a woman sitting across from the brother who stole everything, realizing he never once thought she'd kept the receipts. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you then.